I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, I'm delighted to introduce you to a very talented author, William R Viall, and he has written a very insightful book called The Next Medo-Persian Empire, drawing from his extensive career in law enforcement and a long-standing interest in end-time prophecies. The author offers a unique perspective on the historical and prophetic implications of a new Medo-Persian Empire. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. The links are below this interview. William, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We got some time, so let's start at the beginning. When you talk about a Medo-Persian Empire, what are you talking about exactly?
The empire of the Medes and the Persians from back in the day, when Daniel was in Babylon. The Jews were exiled to Babylon, and that Babylonian empire eventually turned into the Medo-Persian Empire after the Medes and the Persians invaded it and took it over.
Gotcha. And the implications of a new Medo Empire or the next Medo-Persian Empire, what would that be? What are you predicting here?
Well, I believe that the next Medo-Persian Empire will be one of the last signs before the return of Jesus Christ, commonly known as the rapture. Really, in the Bible does not use the term rapture. That's a word that was coined by a Catholic priest back in the 6th century from the word rapazo or something of that nature. And the actual terms are used like taking up or gathering together. Those are the terms used, but that we're going to use, I guess, rapture for the sake of simplicity.
Gotcha. Is your interest in end time prophecies influenced at all by your career in law enforcement?
The investigative part, maybe, yeah. I just kind of I like to know things, and I like to look things up, and of course, originally it kind of happened when I pulled over this evangelical lady I thought she was weaving a little bit too much, and she gave me something that looked like a check and something that looked like a credit card. Said something about your check to heaven or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Anyway, eventually that kind of spontaneously got me thinking about the end times and things of that nature. And then I always like to investigate and work things out. I don't like to take someone's word for it. Mm-hmm. And so I got into researching it myself.
Gotcha. Tell me a little bit about the research process, integrating the historical and the prophetic elements in your book.
Well, what I used mainly was I used BibleGateway.com for a lot of my research. And that allowed me to get each different versions of different Bibles. So if I'm looking at a passage, I could look at the passage and how it read in different versions, and it helped me decipher what was going on in a particular situation. So that's now the other thing about Bible prophecy is a lot of times when Jesus was talking about the end times, he talked parenthetically. In other words, he jumped around quite a bit. So that made it difficult to understand. And of course, you had to use the allegorical terms a lot of the allegorical terms that are used or are thought to be correct. For example, when they talk about a week in the book of Daniel, basically they're talking about 7 years, not a week, but it's a seven-year period.
Gotcha. Now, as we look towards end times and the prophecies and so forth, do you feel like end times are near? Is it going to be 7 days or 7 years or 70 years? Do you have any clue?
You're going to have to read the book to get that to get that answer.
Yep. Yep.
That's what the
Absolutely.
book is all about.
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
not going to go there. I don't want to get into that too much because, you know, I'm always beaten over the head by my friends about, you know, no one knows the day or the hour. Well, that doesn't mean we couldn't know the year and the month.
Right.
So, plus, it's clear after you read a lot of the prophecy, towards the end of the prophecies that Jesus makes or talks about, he makes it clear that you need to be watching for the signs. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people they think that the rapture could happen at any time. Well, it can't really happen at any time. There has to be certain things happen before the rapture can take place.
What are some of the signs that you see now or we should be looking for? Certainly, there seems to be a disintegration of our society from mass shootings to rampant terrorism.
Well, I'll tell you this much. My book is named The Next Medo-Persian Empire. I'm talking about the Medes and the Persians. The Persians are the modern day Iranians. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about them reforming. I'm not going to tell you who the Medes are because you have to read the book. Okay. But the point is, who's causing all the problems in the Middle East right now? They're supposedly the Iranians are backing Hamas and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of like things are beginning to happen. And I might not be right about everything in my book, but if I'm right about most things, why then you've got to be there. I've got to be there to see the signs. And I think my book will help you see the signs.
Now, as you look at the signs of the end of time or the rapture, does it scare you? Or is it something you embrace? Or do you think people should embrace? Should they get their affairs in order? Should they have a better relationship with God, Christ, that kind of thing?
If you are a Christian believer, I also include the Muslims, Messianic Jews. I believe that you don't have a lot to worry about, except that you need to be able to, like I said, know the signs. And in Luke 21, he specifically says, when these things begin to happen, stand up and look to the sky because your redemption is near. So I believe that it ain't going to be like everybody's just fat and happy and walking around and then all of a sudden people start disappearing. Right. I think that there are going to be certain signs, and that's mainly what my book is about. And it's not just about the Medo-Persian Empire because that's I would say one of the last signs, but there are other signs that are in the book that I talk about that are very important to know and to understand and be ready for when the time comes.
When you were doing your research, were there any historical or scriptural sources you found that were really compelling?
Well, of course, the what I did is I started out with the four places where Jesus specifically talks about the end times, which is Mark 13, Matthew 24, Luke 17, and Luke 21. Now, in Matthew 24, he specifically goes back to talking about the abomination of desolation, which is basically the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And he says, as referred to in the book of Daniel. Well, the FBI says that'll be a clue. So we call that a clue. So we go back to the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, of course, to put that into perspective, Daniel at the time, the Jews at the time are in exile. The first temple has been destroyed. They're in exile in Babylon. And so Daniel, when he's writing his book, he starts out writing in the language of the day. And then in chapter 7, he changes over to Hebrews, to the Hebrew language. So again, FBI would call that a clue. So I start reading about that, and it basically chapter 7, 8, and 9 are the visions that Daniel has, and then after his visions, the angel Gabriel comes and analyzes or tells him what the visions mean. And in those visions, we get four things: a timeline of the Messiah, when the Messiah would come, and the fulfillment of the transgressions of the Hebrews. They give us a description of the Antichrist. It gives us allegorically the four nations that will be on the earth at that time. And then lastly, it tells us about the reforming of the Medo-Persian Empire, and that's one of the last signs before Christ's return. So the fulfillment of transgressions of the Hebrews, pretty much, he says it's 70 weeks. And again, we go back to a week is 7 years. And up until the time Jesus was crucified on the earth and crucified was 69 weeks. So that leaves us a 70th week. And that 70th week is what I call the 70th week of Daniel. And that's still to be fulfilled. Then he talks about the physical description and what the Antichrist will do. Again, they don't use the term Antichrist. They use abomination of desolation. And what will happen in the last 7 years when the Antichrist will come and take over the temple halfway through that 7-year period. Then it talks about the four kingdoms allegorically. So if I say to you, describe a country as the bear, what country would you think of?
Russia.
Okay. And if I were to say a lion with eagle's wings,
US of A.
And if I were to say, and this one's a little bit harder, a leopard with bird's wings, and that's probably the EU.
Okay.
And then the last one is the dragon. What would we describe as the dragon?
China.
Right?
Yeah.
So he just use those four descriptions in I can't remember exactly. I think it's 8 and 9 of his book. And then lastly, he talks about the excuse me a minute.
Sure.
The ram and the goat, and I kind of got this from reading another guy's book called Living in the Age of the Ram and the Goat. His name is Darren Thompson, and he basically had kind of the same theory that I had, is that they use the term ram and goat allegorically as the kingdom of Greece and the Medo-Persian Empire. And they talk about how the two will mix it up and this and that. And so I'm not going to go into that too much detail, but the angel Gabriel specifically says 3 times in that prophecy that it'll happen in the end of times or the end of days. So that's why I'm putting this all together as the next Medo-Persian Empire.
What do the folks around you say? Do you have believers around you, non-believers, skeptics? I know you're in law enforcement. I'm sure your buddies on the force probably bust your chops a little bit. What's it like?
I'm retired, so basically it's a bunch of old law enforcement guys sitting around smoking cigars. but basically they're cool with it. I mean, I'm not trying to push anything down anybody's throat. So, now I do have a couple friends who are ministers, and of course they're the old, like I said, no one knows the day or the hour. We can't discuss that.
Gotcha.
But you don't want to get caught with your pants down either. You know what I mean? There's an old saying, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Exactly.
And like I said, my book is about, and it's not all about just physically preparing for something. It's mentally preparing yourself for things also. It's what the military calls situational awareness. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a situation and you don't know exactly what situation you're pretty much in big trouble.
Right.
So in the book, again, if you go after Matthew 24, Jesus starts telling other parables that relate to the end times, and one of them is about the 10 bridesmaids, and 5 of the bridesmaids were wise and 5 were not. The wise ones brought extra oil for their lamps. And of course, the bridesmaids, they represent the wedding party, okay? So the end times, I believe, is all about an ancient wedding, and coincidentally, an ancient wedding was a week long, which again is 7 years. So in the parable, the call goes out that the bridegroom is coming, and the bridesmaids without enough oil, they don't think their lamp's going to stay lit, so they go off to get more oil. And of course, when they're gone, the bridegroom comes and picks up the other 5 wise bridesmaids. Well, what does the lamp represent? Well, a lamp represents light, and light represents faith. And Jesus said, I am the light of the world. So it represents their faith. They lost faith and were confused about what was going on, I think, and weren't taken up in the rapture.
In what ways do you hope your book will contribute to the conversation around end times theology?
Well, that's the thing. It seems like, and I didn't really want to bring this up, but it seems like everybody bases their theory of end times or whatever on a book that was a fictional book that was written, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago. called Left Behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it was everybody's just going, like I said, going along fat and happy, and then all of a sudden, boom, the rapture happens. I don't believe that's the way it's going to happen. I don't believe that's the way it's going to happen at all. And like I said, I believe that there are going to be signs. There are going to be signs of the times, and you need to know those signs of the times, and that's mainly what the book is about.
So obviously, it took more than just yourself to put this book together. You had, you know, literary sources, you had the Bible to turn to, but there's people you spoke to as well in doing your research. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, like I said earlier, the Bible Gateway was instrumental, but also I quoted Gary Muchetta from Handsome Apologetics, and I also quoted Randall Price and Dr. Randall Price, and I would like to thank them for allowing me to use their articles to quote in the book, and pretty much what also got me started was Hal Lindsey's book, Late Great Planet Earth. And his book was mainly about the one of the, again, another one of the parables after Matthew 24, and it was about the fig tree, and the fig tree allegorically represents Israel. And when Israel, when you see the sprouts of the fig tree starting to sprout, you'll know that summer is near. And there it says that this generation will not pass before basically the end comes. Now I'm paraphrasing everything. I'm not quoting specific phrases or passages. So if you take Israel returned in 1948, Hal Lindsey's theory in his book, and I don't know if he corrected this or not, was that the Jews wandered in the desert after leaving Egypt. They wandered in the desert 40 years. So his theory was that a generation was 40 years. That's not my theory. My theory, or actually, I believe it's Psalm 91 tells us that a generation is 70 years, 80 if you're strong. So you can really kind of quickly put that together and figure out the year I'm talking about. It's kind of right around the corner, which you previously asked me before, but I'm more specific about that all in the book.
What were the challenges you faced when putting together this book? Was there anything you found particularly tough when writing the book?
You know, writing the book was a lot easier than trying to sell the book. Let's put it that way. But no, I was surprised, and I kind of stated this in the book too. It was kind of like I was being led by someone or something. I was finding out things that I really didn't know before I was doing my research. And it really kind of surprised me that I was even able to write the book because it was, like I said, it felt like I was being led by something or someone.
So you felt it was like a little bit of divine inspiration?
Well, you know, they talk about the Holy Spirit. You know, of course, I prayed before I prayed for answers. So I guess maybe I got the answers. I thought I got the answers.
Wonderful. Now, well, when you look around, and we touched upon this briefly before, there's so much happening in the United States and the world right now. You know, I don't know. How old were you when you started in law enforcement?
21.
21.
Well, actually, I went into the Army when I was 18, and I went into the military police. So 18.
18. But so 18, 21, even 25, in those years, the types of crimes that we heard about then are nothing compared to the crimes we hear about today. The type of crimes
Right.
we hear about today didn't even exist in our imagination.
Right. It seems like criminals are much bolder nowadays and just don't have any type of respect for anybody, let alone law enforcement.
And human life. I mean, you have
Yeah.
people going into schools and massacring children, and it seems to happen once, twice a year. I mean,
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
this is when you were 21 years old and a new cop on the beat. You weren't picturing stuff like this. You never thought
No,
you'd get a call to go to a school that 40 kids had been shot.
no, no.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
yeah.
And but you know, so you might be a good reason to read my book.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does point to a seismic shift in our culture, a seismic shift in our society. That's for sure. With this type of violence, with this type of depravity, all around us, we see it, and you even see it in government. I mean, you see people now advocating that criminals should not be prosecuted, and we have
Right,
cops who are prosecuted for doing their jobs. I mean, so all of the world's being turned upside down. You're being told, no, it's not, it's right side up. And if you disagree, you're canceled, you're ostracized, you're kicked off of social media.
right, right. Yeah. Um,
This
I,
plays into
I
your thought processes.
I would prefer not to go too deeply with that because I am very conservative. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of theories about that. We could spend more than a half an hour on this.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I understand, and I understand sometimes we got to watch what we say because we live in that kind
Yeah.
of society. Before we leave you today, anything you'd like to add?
Well, with all the things going on, and one thing I think that is kind of uh, a little bit backward thinking in my book is that um, when we have what we think is peace in the Middle East, it's I don't think it's going to be peace in the Middle East. If you see peace in the Middle East, that's when it's time to start looking out for things.
Interesting perspective for sure. William R. Viall has written a wonderful book. It is called The Next Medo-Persian Empire. If you're interested in end times, if you've been listening to this interview and you've been intrigued at all, the links for this book are right below this interview. Click them, order a copy, see what William has to say. He's a credible person. He's worked in law enforcement all of his life. From reading this book, you'll see that he has done his due diligence. He has done his research. He has cross-referenced his facts and opinions that have been proffered in this. And it's a book that is a true eye-opener, and it's highly recommended. William, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Enjoyed having you, enjoyed speaking with you. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.